Hey guys, Tyler Ansman here with Tyler Ansman Performance. So today we're going to talk about eccentric based training and its relevance for throwing velocity and performance. All right, so I think first let's kind of start by talking about what the main goal is when we're talking about throwing, right? We want to be able to use our body like a spring, okay? So we want to efficiently kind of transfer energy throughout the body, right? We want to kind of these stretch and these elastic rebounds that we're getting from each piece in the chain, okay? So then kind of next piece is, what is an eccentric action? So broadly, we have three basic types of muscle actions. We have concentric, so think a shortening action, right? The top part of a bench press. We have an eccentric, think a lengthening action, so the bottom portion of the bench press. Then we have an isometric, think that in-between portion between eccentric and concentric, okay? So what's so important about an eccentric action? So it's a lengthening action. So what's kind of happening is, as load is being applied or force is being applied to the muscle tendon unit, essentially it's overcoming the force of that muscle tendon unit. So it's creating a stretch there, all right? But the muscle is still producing force while that's happening. So we have a couple of really important things that happen there that we're gonna kind of get into as we go through this. But I think broadly, a lot of people have probably heard of eccentric based training because of triphasic training, right? The book that Cal Dietz wrote. There's a lot of really good stuff in there, really important stuff for the industry. But I think one of the things that maybe it gets a little bit off with is its kind of emphasis on nothing but kind of the slower tempo side of eccentric training. And I think that absolutely has its place, because kind of one of the things that it does is it's super relevant for our time under tension and hypertrophy based training, all of these like really nice tissue impacts that we want. And it can be really helpful when we're teaching a new movement or learning a new movement. But when it comes to like purely kind of performance based stuff, it's not the only way to do eccentric training. And for a lot of athletes, it's not the best way to do eccentric training. So we're gonna kind of dive into a little bit of that today. All right, so a couple of important ways that eccentric actions differ from isometric and concentric actions. So one, they're more metabolically efficient. Two, you can produce greater forces eccentrically than you can isometrically or concentrically. And so one of the reasons that they kind of think this may be happening based on the research is there's a reduced rate of cross-bridge detachment, okay? So that may be important. One of the things that goes along with eccentrics that can cause some problems in some cases is there's also more DOMS, or delayed onset muscle soreness, associated with these. So just some things to kind of consider as we're going through this. So, but one of the benefits from eccentric training is greater recruitment of high threshold motor units, right? We can shift that length tension relationship to longer muscle lengths, which may be important when we talk about something like throwing. We can increase the contractile speed of muscle fibers, obviously relevant for basically any kind of sporting related movement we're going to do. We can hypertrophy the type 2 fibers, so the fast twitch muscle fibers, at a relatively higher rate than we might with others. We can increase that muscle fascicle length. So if we want to talk about kind of the shortening velocity of a muscle, greater fascicle length is going to help increase that. And we can decrease some of that Golgi tendon inhibition, so kind of shutting stuff off when we're going at kind of too high of forces. So all of these can be really impactful, but we likely want to use a different type of eccentric training than just tempo eccentric training. So we want to see some higher velocity eccentric training. And one of the really important things is, I think when people think about the force velocity curve, they think about the concentric force velocity curve, right? So essentially, as force increases, velocity decreases, and vice versa. Eccentric actions are different than that. As forces increase, so does velocity, and vice versa there. So that's a really important thing to kind of think about when we're talking about kind of these higher velocity eccentric actions, okay? So one of the things that we've kind of seen in the research is that faster eccentric loading, right, means higher output, right? They've essentially found this in kind of counter movement jumps and things along those lines. So this is extremely relevant for kind of the topics that we're talking about. A couple of the things that we want to do that the eccentric, fast eccentric training can help us do is we want to increase stiffness. So if we think about stiffness and compliance as kind of a spectrum, right? We need a little bit of both when it comes to complex movements like throwing. But greater stiffness is going to allow us to kind of more efficiently kind of transfer that force to the actual skeleton, okay? And it's going to happen a little bit faster, so rate of force development can also increase. And so how do we increase stiffness? So there's a couple of ways. Heavy loading is definitely one of those, but another way is higher velocity actions, okay? And so fast eccentrics can absolutely help with this. So how do we kind of integrate this into our training? So I think there's like a couple of broad ways to do this. One is landings. So whether we think about kind of altitude landings from a box, can do bilateral or unilateral variations. All right, we want some higher velocity impacts like this. Want to make sure we're being aggressive and stiff with our landings. Those are very important, not just kind of collapsing into it, okay? Second would be drop catch variations. So thinking about kind of quickly dropping and immediately returning out of that. And then another one would be band resistance. So band resistance does quite a few things, but broadly kind of the two main things that we're after is it's going to enhance that eccentric action in terms of velocity, and it's going to allow you to accelerate the bar or implement a little bit farther through that range of motion than you might otherwise be able to if there was no band resistance, right? Because you have to start slowing down so it doesn't fly out of your hands, off your back, whatever it might be. So it just allows us to be a little bit more aggressive with our training, right? Think compensatory acceleration training, right? Those kinds of things is kind of really what we're after. Okay, a couple things to remember when we're doing this. We want to work from extensive to intensive. So if you've never done things like this before, we're not going to go right to really aggressive, fast eccentric training. We're going to kind of work our way into this. So starting with extensive plyos and things like that, so we can build up essentially kind of the nervous system changes and the tissue changes that we want before we get into these really aggressive means. So just some things to kind of think about when we're talking about how do we integrate eccentric training and what does that look like for us when we're talking about how this relates to throwers. Stay tuned for part 2 where we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about some of the things going on here. Thanks for watching. Feel free to drop any questions or comments below.